Hello, and welcome to the Seeking Heaven channel. I'm Tamara Caulder Richardson, your host and six-time near-death experiencer, evidential medium, and Christ channeler. And welcome today. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, like, make comments, tell your friends, and also consider being a channel member and check out our sponsored organization, which is my Ascension School Academy of Divine Wisdom.com. So today I'm excited about our guest, and I know you will be too. And today we have, let me tell you a little bit about them, as Curtis Childs. He is the host of Off the Left Eye, which goes through the teaching of Emanuel Swedenborg's work. And his channel is fantastic. If you haven't seen it on YouTube, please do. And all the links will be below. But I'm going to bring on Curtis. And today we're going to be talking about Swedenborg's life, his mystical experiences, his Christian mystic theology, and more. So welcome, Curtis.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Oh gosh, I tell you, I love the work that you're doing, and it's just your YouTube is fun and it's educational, and it's really a lot of knowledge and wisdom, but also lighthearted. So,
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're good at what you do, and I like that you're passionate. So, speaking of passion, tell us how, out of all the people you could study, how did you become turned on to Swedenborg's work? Because you're a natural at this. You're very passionate. I know you've read a lot of his works, but how did this happen with you?
Yeah, I've read a lot and keep reading a lot. Even before we started this interview, I had a couple of minutes and I just was pulling out his one of his books, Heaven and Hell, and just reading through it. And every time that I do, I feel like it just takes me to a place in my mind that I love going. So the story of why I'm so into Swedenborg and into him enough that I would do this whole YouTube channel where I tell total strangers about this weird, like, spiritual phenomena guy is because, well, it's been a lifesaver for me. I feel like there's a lot of cool, compelling things about it. I think anyone who's interested in spiritual experiences should know that I believe Swedenborg's recorded experiences are the longest single set of experiences ever written down. I mean, we're talking about this is a guy who's having lucid experiences every day for 30 years and
Crazy.
cataloging them and writing them down. That's interesting on its own. It's a fascinating part of spiritual experience history. It's also cool because it's something from hundreds of years ago. He's writing in the mid 1700s that could have been written, a lot of it today. You're seeing
I agree.
Raymond Moody, when he wrote Life After Life, which was sort of, he coined the term near-death experience in there. He had a whole section about Swedenborg because the similarities between Swedenborg experiences and modern near-death experiences were so striking. So that's a great corroboration and strengthening of that. But really, none of that is why I'm so into Swedenborg. I'm into it because the picture of reality that he paints is the most wonderful thing I've ever come across. The answers that he has to life and what happens in me when I take his description of what's really going on. Like, he'll have the explanation of, why do you think the thoughts that you think? Why do you feel the feelings that you feel? Why does life go the way that it does? What's next for us? What is the right way to live a moral and spiritual life? Those answers are so good and have helped me in places where nothing else could. That's why I'm there, and that's why I've stayed. And since I started this channel, I have seen it do the same thing for other people. Because I started it thinking, wow, this has been huge for me. I guess I'll put it out there. I don't know if anyone else is going to see the value in it, but very quickly I realized that this can change almost anybody's life. And so in seeing that impact and what it can do for people, all right, I'm in and I'm staying in. So, I mean, that's the short version of why Swedenborg. I mean, my parents read Swedenborg, so I had access to
Yes.
it from a young age. I didn't find him at some point. However, there was definitely a time that it became real to me when I started to have, as I approached adulthood, I started to have some mental health issues, and I was struggling. I had depression, anxiety, those kinds of things. And I began to really see Swedenborg's message as a real-time guide to, like, a owner's manual for the human mind. And the tools I was getting out of there were saving me. It was like rescuing me when nothing else could. So that's when it became
Beautiful.
really real to me, when I saw it start to pull its weight and become medicine. And then I never looked back. It still is like what guides me through every day. It still gives me this perspective that the more I learn about how everyone else thinks and all the different perspectives in the world, the more I like Swedenborg's perspective. And it's not to say that it negates other perspectives, but it just
Mhm.
provides me with a real clear compass and gives me a great framework by which to see the commonalities with other worldviews and ways to approach life, as well as contrast with some dysfunctional ways of thinking that I've had in the past. So it's good. It's the gift that keeps giving to me. And so I'm trying to share that with the world.
Now, how long have you had your channel?
It feels like 1,000 years, but it's actually been, well, 1,000 years in internet time. It was 2010 when we
Oh
put
my
our
gosh,
first
it is
video out.
1,000 years of internet time. You were
It,
like a real renegade pioneer.
the 2010, like, did they even have an internet back then? And actually, when I put my first YouTube videos up, I didn't even really know what YouTube was.
Oh, I
I
agree.
like I
I didn't know that much either when I started, yeah.
Yeah, I just thought, like, I guess if you fall off your skateboard and someone films it, they put it on YouTube. Or there's a cat that jumps into a box, they put that on YouTube. I didn't
No,
realize.
that's TikTok.
Yeah. Oh, is that, well, now it's TikTok, but it wasn't back then. There was
Yeah,
no.
that's true.
So I didn't, but I did know that I was trying to get Swedenborg's message out, and I started to look at YouTube, and I saw that there was this really large, robust conversation around questions of reality and the divine. And what I saw in there was a lot of sort of extremism. There was people who were very fundamentalist religious people. They were aggressive materialistic atheist people, and there wasn't a lot in the middle. And I thought to myself, there Swedenborg can add to this conversation. And so I got in there, and it's been awesome. It's been a much better response to his material than I ever would have thought. And I think we'll keep going for another 1,000 years.
Well, I think his work is very grounding, and he is. I'm just blown away how ahead of his time that he is, and that how much he's done. The plethora of work. You said there's 30 volumes of theology, but that's not including articles or journals or any of this kind of things. Or I mean, I want to say blogs. They didn't have blogs back then. But articles.
Paper blogs.
Paper blogs, exactly. So, I mean, it's an amazing amount of work. But what impresses me about him, I started reading about him. I don't know how I came across him, but years ago, I think it was Edgar Casey. I started reading him at 12. I was an unusual little kid, and
It's what all
everybody else
12-year-olds are into. Yeah.
everybody else is going and hanging out and doing whatever, and I'm in the school library reading Edgar Casey and reality and everything. So I guess it was in my 20s I started looking at Swedenborg, and it just, I think it wasn't totally ready to embrace it, although I really enjoyed it. I came back to it in my 30s, and I went, uh, I was really shocked in his mystical experiences and how he was still, um, from what I interpret as I mean, you may interpret it differently, but like a Christian mystic. So he didn't go completely woo off the rails, but he did have these mystical experiences, and he did question traditional Christianity and doctrine, and he reinterpreted it. And I thought that was interesting. So, I want to get into more of these kinds of things. But how did he go from an industrialist in the 1700s to taking on these topics that basically, like you said, that we're asking, why are we here? What is this purpose? We have this thing, this Bible, but how do you interpret that? What is heaven and hell? What are these things? What really are angels? And he decided that wasn't good enough, and he took it on his own to go further. So how did he go from industrial? He was actually he was well off, wasn't he? I mean, he did well for himself. He was a business person, and then he went into this. How did he cross that over? Because then he spent the rest of his life in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, I think that if we were talking to him now, like if he was here in the StreamYard chat with us, he'd be saying that it was what he calls divine providence. So to him, that was the way in which the divine arranges life to bring the best outcome. And because even though it could look like his turn into mystical experiences and theology came out of left field, looking back, he felt like his previous life was building up to that. So Swedenborg was exceptionally smart and successful guy. He was uh, one of the top scientists in the world in his day. And he was, back then, science was a bit simpler, so you could actually master multiple fields in it.
Okay.
Whereas today it's so complicated, you're lucky to master a little slice of one. But he was like a leader in anatomy. He started the first scientific journal in Sweden. He founded the scientific branch of crystallography. There was a number of things that he did as a scientist that gained him international renown. Still in textbooks today, they'll talk about how he invented the nebular hypothesis, about how galaxies form. But also he was an inventor. He was the assessor of mines that's in Sweden's mining industry. So Sweden at the time was a world power. Their mining industry was a major industry, and he was overseeing a large part of that, but also had patents on machines that he had designed as an engineer to make that more efficient. He was also in the Swedish government. He was in the House of Nobles. So he was doing everything, and he had published a lot, and he had a lot of success. And then in his mid 50s, he started to have this spiritual awakening. And he actually, a cool thing about it is you can go back and almost see the play by play of it happening, because he was keeping a journal at the time. It's published as Swedenborg's Journal of Dreams. And you can see how he began to have these vivid dreams that then became more and more lucid and started to happen when he was awake. And finally, it culminated in what he believed was a vision of Jesus, who
Mhm.
told him, "You got to go and do this." And from then on, he called it having his spiritual eyes opened. He maintained that what happened to him is not something that is, he's not a different class of being than we are. We all have a spirit, and the
Mhm.
spirit has a form just like our body does. So it's got features. It's got eyes just like ours do. Mainly, our spiritual senses are closed off because we're so focused on the physical. But
Yeah.
for him and for other people, those can open up. So his spiritual eyes opened. He had this. He felt like he was being given this commission to go and explore life after death, and explore some of the truth um, about tenets of Christian theology. I think Christian mystic is a fair description of him, even though the things he describes are often have great outreach into all kinds of traditions from history. But um, he began to have experiences with the spiritual world every day, and he wrote them all down. But also he published these organized books that took on the big topics. He talked about divine providence. Why does evil exist? Why do things happen like they do? He talked, his most famous book, as I mentioned, was called Heaven and Hell. This was him talking directly about the life after death, and how that works, and how
Mhm.
it's structured, and how the way that we live today determines the kind of afterlife we have, and how the people that are in the afterlife affect us day to day as we're living our lives here. So he believed that everything he'd learned about physical science equipped him to understand the way that spiritual things work, because the spiritual world and the physical world are just like intertwined at every bit. So everything he learned about anatomy and the way the human body worked helped him to understand the way the spiritual world worked, because that human form is actually repeated at different scales. You can even like look at heaven and see the way in which it resembles the human form, not like the shape of it, but the function. Like in the human body, there are all these different organ systems and elements that are all unique, but they're all working toward the same goal together. And he says, if you step way back, you can think about people fulfilling those same functions. You can almost look at all of heaven like a human body. So to him,
It's beautiful.
everything he knew about the way the physical world works was the base from which he could understand how the spiritual world works.
And I could totally see why he was, up for the job and chosen, because he had a certain way of coming to conclusions and looking at things that just wasn't everybody, especially during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was willing to step outside of that and just be in a place of neutrality, uh, and just observe. So, what are his main datums that he came up with?
Yeah, if I just like, what are the pillars?
Yeah, the
I would
pillars are.
say One is that the real you is your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
We are clothed in a material body, but that's not who you are. Your spirit, you have a spirit right now, and that's who you are. Life continues on after you die. God exists, and God is pure love and wisdom. So is
Mm-hmm.
infinitely loving toward every person and infinitely wise, and is constantly at work to lead us into what is good and true in our lives. He had a spent a lot of time talking about the importance of the Bible, but he was adamant that the Bible is a spiritual document. So it is written in a symbolic language that he called correspondences. When I talked before about how the spiritual and physical world are tied together, they're tied by what are called correspondences. So if there's something spiritual, for example, in the spiritual world, truth radiates out from God into anyone's mind who is willing to accept it. It's just like how here light radiates out from the sun, and that's what powers plants and all life. So he said there's like a one-to-one of things that are in the spiritual world to things that are in the physical world. And the Bible is speaking in that language. So whenever it's talking about earthly things like temples and how to build them and lands and seas, it's talking about spiritual things through correspondences. So he spent a lot of time, his first 12 volumes that he wrote were just taking you through parts of the Bible and showing you, look, this is how it speaks. This is how it's telling you things that are true, not just about, it's not about people long ago. This is about how you work right now. This is about how the universe is. So that was an important one for him. A big one for him was that love is primary over faith. So faith would be your belief system and your affection for your belief system about how spiritual reality works.
Yes.
In his day, the Christian church placed all their emphasis on that. Like, do you say a certain confession? Are you considered a Christian or not? That's what matters. And Swedenborg, after seeing the actual life after death and the way that things work there, said that's not how it works. What we love is what makes us who we are. So you can have all of the religious tenets in the world. You can have all the principles and axioms and know all the religious stuff, but if you're a jerk, if you're mean, that that takes precedence. If you're using religious things just to gain power for yourself and have dominion over others, you might as well not have those religious things. It's actually the heart of Christianity is the love, and the doctrine follows from that, and that's crucial to understand, that it's really our will who makes us who we are.
Wow, I couldn't agree. I'm in agreement with all of this and more. So, what made him so during the time? How did people perceive him? Because he was a renegade, even though he was mentioning the thing that was most important. He mentions, Jesus. His big thing is love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. It's all about love. So, and you saw what happened to him. So, how was this perceived? Because the whole point of being the church control. I mean, there was that, we have a history of that. Different religious Christian sects, right? There's that. So how was he perceived at the time? Was he accepted, or was he rocking the boat?
There was a wide range of reactions to Swedenborg in his day. Um, he definitely, his scientific reputation definitely paid a price, because
Oh.
imagine you're a well-respected scientist and you start to say, well, I'm talking to angels and talking to spirits, and
Good point there.
people are
Okay.
like, okay, Swedenborg. So some people
Okay,
just
got it.
mocked him and
Okay.
publicly, and some big names, said he'd lost his mind and there was nothing of value in what he was saying. There was some backlash from the church, and you think about, it was a very different situation back then from how it is now. Now you could get a church that is angry at you and sends you a letter or something. Back then the church was the state. So he actually couldn't even publish his books in Sweden where he lived. He had to travel to, mainly it was in Amsterdam and London, because they had freedom of the press. So because what he was saying did not align in all parts with the standard Lutheran doctrine, which his father was a Lutheran bishop, like he came from that tradition, but he
Yeah.
said, look, I'm seeing how this really is, and it's not like we're not blowing the whole thing up. There's key things in Christianity that are true, but you're wrong about a lot of things. So his works were actually put on trial near the end of his life. Like he was being tried for heresy, but he was fine. He ended up being fine. He didn't get. He was well connected. I don't think he wasn't in danger of being imprisoned. But it just to show some of the reaction. There's plenty of people who said this is heresy, this is wrong and leading people in the wrong direction and condemning it. There were people who loved it though, right from the start. There was people who saw it and saw the value in it and believed this is true Christianity. There was one time when somebody was criticizing Swedenborg and saying, well, this is Swedenborgianism, what he's doing here. And he wrote back and said, this is not Swedenborgianism, this is true Christianity. And in his last book, which is called True Christianity,
Yeah.
there was a lot of people saying, well, who do you think you are? You're not an ordained priest. What makes you think that you can talk about these things? You're just a scientist. And so on the tagline of that book, True Christianity, he said, True Christianity by Emanuel Swedenborg, servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. So he was just saying, look, I'm just doing what God is telling me to do.
His boss is bigger than their bosses. So
Yeah, that's right.
I'm gonna go with him. He's like serving God and Christ. Yeah. So I mean, he pulled rank there. So sometimes people just don't understand. And there probably was some jealousy too.
For sure.
He was successful in many areas, and not to mention he was a writer, he was an author, he was an industrialist, and so he I'm sure there were some people that wish that they had come up with some of the things that he had. So now, why do you feel like his works has stayed? Here we are. I mean, how many years later? My gosh, and they're still popular. And there is a Swedenborg Foundation, and many of the books you can find even are free. I mean, it's incredible knowledge. I mean, you do need to understand, people that are viewing, that it is written back in the 1700s, so you've got to be a little patient. You may need a dictionary close by, a certain word, just because our English has changed a little bit. It's not impossible, but it actually, if anything, gives you a better education. But you have to be a little bit studious sometimes with reading his works. But why do you think they survived so long, and why do you feel like they're still so popular?
Yeah. Well, the good thing about his works being hard to read is that it makes our YouTube channel necessary, because what we do is go in there and we take the time to read and understand deeply and then tell it in a hopefully a fun and easy to digest way. I think that Swedenborg, his works, it's been a mix of them underperforming and overperforming. So as you said, they've lasted, and not all writings that come out of that time period are still there. I think Swedenborg would have rather had more people had heard of it and ingested it and taken it in. But the reason why you still have like a Swedenborg Foundation today is that right from the beginning, there have been different groups of people that believe that this is of great value. And so you had Swedenborg in his day, he never had any kind of organized following. So that he didn't have a church that he ran. He didn't have people that followed him around. He didn't have devotees or anything. All he did was write the books and publish the books and try to distribute them. So he would try to get them into the hands of influencers. He would go and meet with royalty and try to show them, look, don't you want to read this and check it out? He would send his books to educational and church leadership and business leadership. He tried to get it out to where people could hear. But that was sort of where his mission ended. He was writing and publishing and trying to distribute up until the end. And we've done a lot of research on the different ways he tried to publicize it and everything like that. But shortly after he died, there was groups of people that felt like this is really valuable and we need to translate it. I mean, Swedenborg wrote in Latin because that Latin was the educated language back in the day. So he wrote in Latin, so people were translating it into English and German and other languages. And they believed it was important to try to spread the word of it. And so you've had dedicated groups of people since then producing, even the Swedenborg Foundation, which is who I work for. They've been around for 170 years now, just translating, publishing, and then more recently we've gotten into this sort of digital outreach. There's also been a long line of influential people who have found Swedenborg and had it change their lives. Like Helen Keller, for example, she was an avid reader of Swedenborg. You had a lot of important thinkers and artists like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thoreau, who are heavily, William Blake, who are heavily influenced by Swedenborg. Architects like Daniel Burnham, who part of the city of Chicago is designed based on some of Swedenborg's description of the New Jerusalem, the spiritual city. So there's been an outsized influence through those um, through those influencers who came across him. Also in the 1800s in America in particular, he got to be pretty famous because there was spiritism. There was a big movement around that. So people were interested in all things
Mm-hmm.
having to do with spirits. And Swedenborg, you can see newspaper articles from that time period. And they'd be talking about, this is kind of like Swedenborg. People knew about it then. But as that sort of faded, he faded a bit out of notoriety. He still remains relatively unknown in the world compared to where I think he should be based on his contributions. But I do think we've
Mm-hmm.
had some good success on our channel of
Definitely.
putting him out there, and he's popping up here and there. They had a Netflix made a movie about someone who's reading Swedenborg just like a few months ago. So he's out there, but through our channel, we're trying to make sure more people know about him.
I agree. I think that I have to agree with you on that. I think his work is really outstanding, and it is, especially now. To me, the information is so grounding. There's so
Mhm.
many people that I come across that uh, either A, they're really searching for spiritual answers, or B, some of them are lost.
Yeah,
And they'll tell you, and I would not wish that for anyone, because if we live long enough, we do have periods where we do feel like that, right?
yeah, right.
And his work can be uh, really grounding and to help you understand um, why we're here and what our role is, and of course that's to love. But what do you feel, knowing Swedenborg's work, to just kind of wrap up the segment, I want you to talk about where we are today in society, about what do you feel some of the precepts that some of Swedenborg's work could really help this world. What part of his, if he had a message to say right now, what would he tell this world?
Sure. Yep. So what you love makes you who you are. So that's important. Pay attention to the things that you enjoy and the kind of pleasure that they give you. And that's good and bad. To him, he would use the word love to describe both sides of the spectrum. Like I can have a love of taking care of my daughter, and that's good and it feels good. I can also have a love of being right or being in control of people, and that has its own kind of, oh, that feels good when I put that person down because it made me feel good. So it's up to us to choose to be aware of what kind of affections we have for things and steer ourselves towards the ones that are good and true. So I think that to him, that he called that process regeneration, that this was the essential spiritual growth work of life, is to examine yourself, and not in a heavy-handed way, and not, you're not trying to feel guilty, but to notice what do I want to increase and what do I want to try to decrease based on what I believe is right and wrong. And if everyone was doing that work, you'd see the world improve a lot. So I think that's important. He certainly was trying to tell people about the reality of the spiritual world, and that right now you have a spirit, and that spirit is even surrounded by the people who have gone before us. Everyone who's ever died is in this spiritual world, and that spiritual world influences us. It influences, just like the physical world influences us. The kind of shows we watch, what we see on YouTube, the music we listen to, the things we read influences us. There are spiritual influences as well, and if the more we become aware of that, the better we can understand what we are as human beings and why we feel the way we do, and better navigate. He would also say, to go looking for the divine, and start to build a relationship, because there is this freedom and this liberation in meeting God and letting God start to lead us through our lives. I mean, to him, that was the key to life, was being in what he called the stream of providence, where you are letting God be your sort of GPS that is going to move you through and make all these decisions that will lead you to happiness, which he called heaven.
Oh gosh, this is what I say all the time, those exact things. This is absolutely beautiful. It's true. It's a lot easier if you let go and let God. But some people, they hold on, I think, because of maybe possibly the dogma or the
Mm,
confusions or misunderstandings, when in reality, that's where we're from. We are from a place called heaven. We are from
yeah.
that place. So it's a lot easier because we have a team working for us and we're really not alone. So tell everyone how to get in touch with you, and definitely everybody, please check out. There's so many wonderful teachings on the YouTube off the left eye. Curtis is amazing. So anything he's got it listed by different topics is fantastic. So please check that out, and I'll leave you the last word.
Sure. Well, thank you so much again for having me. Yeah, youtube.com/off the left eye is our channel there. If you go watch any of our videos and just leave a comment on there, we'll find it. We'll get back to you. I think that's the easiest way to do it. So thank you for having me, and thank you for what
Thank
you're doing
you.
to increase people's knowledge of what's important in life. I'm glad I could get to come on and talk a little bit about this. And I would say that the message I would leave is that everything's going to be okay. Everything's gonna be okay. You said you have a team working for you. That's right. That there's an amazing amount of care. Your life can seem like it's chaos and that it's random and that it's not going how it should, but there's an amazing amount of care being put into your life to, even though it may be painful in the moment, that it's leading to a good end. And that this is the intent of what God is doing, and it's gonna be okay in the end. I think that's probably the primary message.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Curtis. You're amazing. Keep doing your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Please subscribe, like, and make comments, and support this channel by becoming a member. Thank you for your continued support.